So we talked a little bit about what is abuse and the different kinds. So if someone, and I think I believe there are three levels, if you like, within people, and that you've got thinking, you've got feeling, and you're knowing, and you've got knowing. So if people out there know that something that happened to them is wrong, is inherently, although it was normalized, although it was within the institutional setting, although it was kind of gaslit and smoothed away by people around them, they know something's wrong. If that's the case, what could you outline the process for an abuse survivor to kind of bring their experience to light? What should they prepare for, and what would happen next to them if they were to, is it the police? Is it the local authority? Is it solicitors? If you could just cover across that, would be helpful.
There's quite a lot to say about that. I mean, I think the starting point is to emphasise, to people that there is support out there. There isn't as much as there should be, but there is support out there, and organisations like yours can help to kind of get people started on this process and give them the confidence to do it. And so, I encourage anybody who's watching this to contact your organisation and get a sort of steer as to the way forward. In terms of the sort of different processes, so if having reflected on it, you believe that you've been the victim of a criminal act, a criminal assault, abuse, anything of that kind, then it is important to go to the police, and the police will investigate. Ultimately, if they think that there's potential, it's possible that a crime has been committed, they will then send the file to the Crown Prosecution Service, who will advise on whether a prosecution is possible. So that's the kind of criminal process. In terms of the civil process, which is obviously what I'm involved in, the starting point is obviously to try to speak to a specialist lawyer, somebody who's done these cases, knows how the law works. There are a small number of specialist lawyers in this area, so get legal advice from a specialist. And if there is potential for a civil claim, then what that lawyer will do will be initially to sort of do a kind of investigative and document gathering process. So getting a hold of records, getting hold of medical records, because that lawyer will need to look at the impact of the abuse on your life over the course of your life, and looking ahead into the future. So getting medical records and kind of building up a dossier of information about what happened to you, and the impact on you. And part of that will involve getting medical evidence, probably from a psychiatrist or psychologist, an independent report where the expert will interview you and then make some assessment of the impact. At some stage in the process, once the initial document gathering has been completed, the lawyer will write a letter of claim, setting out what happened to you. It's really important, by the way, that you see that letter. I've taken over cases where I'm just dealing with one at the moment, actually, where a letter of claim was written on behalf of a client, and the client never saw the letter. It was inaccurate, and then the survivor is then blamed for the inaccuracies in that letter. So really important for the survivor to see that and having proper input into this process and be in control of this process as you move forward with it. The letter of claim goes to the organisation. The organisation will then have to respond to that. And with the information that the lawyer has built up around impact and the medical evidence and so on, it may be possible to negotiate a settlement of the claim without proceedings. If that's not possible, then it may be necessary to get into legal proceedings. So that kind of, I'm just kind of giving there a kind of very basic outline of the two different processes, the criminal side of it and then the civil side of it. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that kind of sits underneath that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, it's important to have kind of a quick summary like that, so that people see the two different routes. And we were talking before we started recording today about the importance of what survivors can do before they either go to the police, speak to a specialist abuse lawyer. because the journey is a long and an emotional one. So to speak to the long element first, you know, I know how long is a piece of string, cases take different times, but we do hear from survivors that things have been going on for years and years on some of their cases. It's not a quick process, is it? Typically.
Well, it isn't quick. It can occasionally be quick, but in the main, cases, I think particularly in the criminal process, cases at the moment are taking far too long to go through the criminal process. And in saying that, I don't want to deter anybody from going to the police if they've got a complaint. I hope that these things will improve over time, but at the moment, we do have a problem within the criminal justice process of the police taking far too long to investigate allegations. And what I think tends to happen is that where an allegation relates to non-recent events, that may attract less priority from the police, because obviously they're balancing resources, and they may be under pressure to focus resources on things that they perceive as going on at the moment. Actually, that's a misconceived approach, because things, non-recent abuse can actually lead on to investigations into current abuse if that abuser is still operating. So I think it's a mistaken approach, but we do see that in cases. And at the moment, fundamentally, the problem we have is that there are just not enough resources in the criminal justice system. There's not enough resources in policing, and that is affecting how long it takes for cases to go through the criminal justice process. In terms of civil cases, where delays come into those really tend to be a product of what's going on in the criminal process, because sometimes what happens is that you start a civil case, but it can't really move forward until the criminal side of it has been resolved, and so delays in the criminal process then kind of spill over into the civil process. But fundamentally, the civil process, apart from that issue, and that can be a big issue of the criminal process affecting it, the civil process should be a shorter process. It isn't always, but fundamentally it should be a shorter process, because it's about building up the evidence, which will take a few months, but it should be possible to do that within that kind of time frame, and then moving on to sending a letter of claim to the institution and trying to explore whether resolution is possible on without going to legal proceedings. So yeah, I mean, when people experience delays, I think in the main those tend to be a result of the criminal process being very delayed. It's not always the case, but that is a big factor at the moment, and it's a very, very frustrating factor. And actually, just to say, there's a number of cases where survivors have had to wait a very, very long time because of problems associated with extraditing abusers from other countries. That's been a big factor. And I know, there's been publicity about some of those cases, and I think, Nicky Campbell has talked about some of the issues that have arisen in his case, where they're trying to extradite a perpetrator from South Africa. I've had other cases where that same problem has arisen, and extradition, adds a whole another layer of delay to the process. And again, that just takes far too long.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. And to reiterate what you're saying, don't let this put people off the process. Our conversation today is very much about letting people know the realities, and so that was the length part of my initial question, and the emotional hardship of bringing a case. So when someone brings something forward and they speak to the police, or when they have a conversation with an abuse lawyer, there's going to be going back over what happened again and again. There's going to be medical records, and then we hear, excuse me, a lot from survivors, excuse me, that the process with a psychiatrist or a psychologist can be very challenging, and then if it goes to court, or if there's a countering questioning from, for instance, from the defendant's side, it can be really, really difficult. And we hear consistently that having the right support framework in place as a survivor, family, friends, for it to be kind of out in the open, so that they're not fearing kind of the exposure side of things along that journey, and then also having therapists, counselling, coaching, emotional support services as well. Would you add anything to that, or from your experiences, to how a survivor can resource themselves?
I think that's spot on. I agree with all of that. I think, before going into a process like this, whether it's involved speaking to the police or speaking to lawyers, think about what resources you've got to support you through that process, family, friends, and so on. Don't try and do this alone. Don't come back from a lengthy police interview to an empty house and be on your own, trying to sort of process what you've been through. Think about trying to sort of lay the groundwork for that by having support and resources in place. I think that's just so important. And I think, when you say that, that's probably the most fundamental piece of advice you can give to anybody starting out on this process. And just bear in mind, that there are forms of support out there. There isn't enough, but there is support out there, and spending a bit of time thinking about how you can access it and what support you can get and what you're going to need through this process is really important.